Om, Om. Just started the live stream. If you're jumping in right now, please leave a comment. Let me know how I look, how I sound, and then we'll get right into it. Pretty crazy live stream today. A lot to talk about. In the meantime, I'm just going to sit here and do some chanting. So, Om. All right, I see some people. All right. So if you're watching this, just fast forward after the fact, but we've had a solar energy explosion and what I'm calling a coordinated energy blast, because as you'll see here with our 131 angstrom view of the sun, things have gone nuts. We already have a solar storm coming in tomorrow, if not even maybe tonight. It depends on how fast it is. And we've had really interesting activity for the Earth itself as well during all this. And I think this is also speaking to the energy flux of the greater morphic field and how this is relating to our chakral centers and energy flow through them and our meridians and all this stuff. So we're going to talk about that in this video. There's really too much to talk about in this video, so I can't encapsulate it in 5 seconds and give it to you. You're just going to have to watch to get the full download. That's how it works. So tons of solar energy coming in, more on top of the solar storm that we have headed our way, a lot more because we've had near X-class flares. They've been sympathetic flares if we give this a watch. However you want to see you all in there. God bless. Hope you're all doing well. We've had these sympathetic flares starting around the 28th today. There's the first one. That was an X-class flare right at the boundary of X-class. And then we get these guys and they just start popping off like crazy. And so on the 27th, we had 3 M-class flares. They launched multiple CMEs, and those are combining into a cannibal CME. So the plasma condenses, spikes even higher because the one that was launched after the first one was faster. So it catches up, cannibalizes it, turns it into a bigger wave. That's what triggered that great G5 storm back in May, is that there was multiple CMEs that combined together. And so that's what we're having come in tomorrow, roughly. But now we've had new solar activity and much stronger. It was like a 9.98 M-class flare that started right at the beginning of the 28th UTC time. So we'll see it here. So give this a watch. There's that near X-class flare. And then we start to see sympathetic flaring between the two of them, going really wild. Hey Jerome, welcome to the Soul Tribe. And so in general, there has been a new emergence of solar flux pushing out of the sun. We'll look at the sunspot intensity grams. We really see that clearly occur. This new massive flux bundle, it's like this big, pushing out of the sun in the southern hemisphere, which I think is relating to our lower chakral centers, which would be root chakra, sacral, and then also solar plexus. And then you could think of the equator as like the heart. Maybe this is just, my imagination, but I think the energy centers that we have are also the same for the Earth, then also for I think everything is fractal and mirrors out in nature. So you could make that interpretation. And so we've had tons of solar activity. Let's look at the chronograph. We'll come back to some of this. But there's that first halo CME that was lopsided, and then a second one that followed. We'll see this again. And then we see a new one come out from that near X-class flare. So those are the first two. And then watch this one that comes out just recently. Just all directions kind of expands. It's not this big kind of nice bubble, you could say, that forms, but it's almost just like a tsunami coming in because there's so much, and that makes it more powerful. It's not as fast of a velocity. So that CME that's coming in that launched today and is still in the process of being launched because these flares are just going like crazy, that's not going to catch up to the storm that we have coming in tomorrow on the 29th. But this is showing that we're going to have like a solid wave of geomagnetic storming if it connects to our Earth, coming in probably around August 1st or so. And we don't have a space weather model for it yet. NOAA updated their space weather model yesterday for these other two. I can zoom over to that. Here's the space weather model for the cannibal CME. We see the two of them kind of combine right here. It's a direct impact. It's not going to the south or to the north. High density, we see that spike right there. Higher velocity too coming in, and that is showing up on the, they have it actually pegged for the 30th or so. So we'll see if that model is accurate. The one I showed in yesterday's video had it coming in at 1600 on the 29th. So anywhere from the 29th to the 30th, this storm is expected to hit. But if we go back to our chronograph imagery here for the 27th to 28th, we see this is almost just like a solid wave right there. Kind of continuous, and then more of it kind of in certain areas because of the flaring characteristics. So that is, I think, going to be an even more significant solar storm impact when it occurs. And it almost certainly is going to occur, because if we go back once more to our 131 angstrom view, here we have 3762 kind of just off of Earth direct, and then we have these other 5 sunspot groups, 63 through 67, rotating into Earth direct bullseye. And then just in the past 24 hours, 3768 has kind of formed out of nowhere. We see the sunspot group really just start to come out of nowhere, and we'll look at that intensitygram imagery showing that this solar flux is kind of coming out in the center of these two, and that's why they're sympathetically flaring. And so when you have something here, and your midlines there, you're just getting energy in general pushed out to that center region. But if we zoom forward quite a bit, we also see some really big activity in the Schumann resonances, and not only out of Tomsk. We see this out of Tomsk. We also see this out of Hungary. So we're going to talk about the background electromagnetic field as well. We're also going to talk about earthquakes and why we're at an anomalous low in terms of earthquake activity. Very odd. But in general, we're going to start with the solar stuff. Here's this intensitygram I want to show you. And let me rewind this so we can see it from the beginning. Here's the intensitygram. And so we see this group here, 6.2, getting bigger. We see all 5 of these getting stronger. And then here is 6.8 right there. Look how quickly it forms. Out of nowhere, it just suddenly materializes. And it's right next to 3762. So they are almost forming this larger cluster in and of themselves, just like this one here, which is a very large cluster. Yes, everything is very intense today. So I've been feeling this myself the past couple days. I was having a little bit of like a headache, but not that much. But there's no reason why I should have. I mean, I've been working a lot, but I've also been going out and doing my grounding, and eating well. And then yesterday when I was eating, I was just like, the food didn't want to sit in my stomach initially. And that was right when all this big flaring was occurring. So maybe I shouldn't have had dinner that night. But yeah, it can be really intense for some people. But I mean, we see this solar flux pushing out of the sun right now really nicely with our intensitygram. And this is going to likely continue because 3768 right here is just now starting to push out and form. And really nicely too. But these guys, see how much they've changed as well. I mean, again, we see just these cores initially. I talked about that. And I was saying, give this a watch. And here we are now a few days later. And we are seeing the effects of that. I mean, it's not like I report on this stuff for no reason. I'm usually pretty spot on. A lot of people, yeah. Anyway, so it's wild right now. Lots of energy coming in from the sun. All these coordinated energy blasts, these sympathetic flares. It's altering what we're seeing on Earth. And so we can see this really clearly with our X-ray flux 14-day. Just the increase in solar energy and solar flux. This is 14 days of data right here. So if I move the cursor off, we see that things have basically been fairly flatline. I mean, maybe things went down a little bit right here as compared to like the week prior, But now look with what's happened with these sunspot groups. Solar energy flux, this is X-ray flux, has gone dramatically up. And so as you move up into X-ray flux and gamma ray flux, you have higher vibrational forms of light, right? Their wavelength is less, their frequency is up, and they can do things that other forms of light can't do. So for example, with the gamma ray burst back in 2022, October 9th, they suspect that some of the weird spectra that they saw from that gamma ray burst was because there were gamma ray photons that were colliding and actually creating electrons and positrons. And I don't really understand how that works, but you only can get that with these extremely high vibrational wavelengths of light, gamma rays. And so X-rays are just one step below. So when we have our X-ray flux go up, we have a greater change in the quantum field, you could say, right? Things are more, you can't have radio waves, as far as I know, you can't have radio waves combine forming electrons and positrons, which then, can annihilate and create, radio waves. It's gamma rays that do that. And so X-rays are just below that. And what that gamma ray flux shows you is that there's a greater ability to manipulate matter in space-time, in our reality. And so as X-ray flux goes up from the sun, so too does the framework of our reality become slightly more malleable. How much? I don't know, but that's just an intuition thing. So we also have our synoptic report we can look at just to see all these different sunspot groups. So you can see when I say a number where they are. This is 17362, so 3762 right here, and this is 3768. The later number shows that it formed later in the sequence. So you can see that they're kind of forming almost this cluster here. This is about 12 hours out of date now, because this was taken back, you see, on the 27th at midnight. So actually this is evolved quite a bit. We'll look at some more recent magnetograms. But then here is 3763, 64, 65, 66, 67, and we do have 69 rotating into view there. So yeah, things are really wild right now. And then if we look specifically at our intensitygram, we see the sunspots really nicely, very clearly, and just in general, look at all this concentrated energy flux right now on the Earth-facing side. This is definitely going to affect the solar wind, in addition to the coronal mass ejections that have been launched. So not only do we have enhanced solar activity headed our way with these solar storms, these increased plasma densities, the solar wind in general right now is just really wild. We can see that clearly if we go to our 304 angstrom view, and that is, where is 304? There it is. Here's our 304 angstrom view. This shows a little bit deeper into the sun. Sometimes you can see these prominences and filaments launched and everything, but in general, you'll just see a lot of this activity here. And what this is showing some of the outpouring of solar material into the solar wind, because that's what's creating the solar wind at all times. But especially here near the end, you see some of these magnetic field lines kind of burst and go out like this energy flux. And so not only is our interplanetary magnetic field and solar wind being enhanced by the CMEs, but just by the fact that these sunspots are there and they have greater flux. And they have these unstable magnetic fields and all these little flares that are occurring. The base load of flux is much higher. And so that is also going to be strengthening the interplanetary magnetic field in and of itself. So it's like tide is coming in and then a wave is on top, you could say, right? It's not like tide's coming out and then you have a wave, right? You have all these factors aligning. We also have, I want to show the magnetogram before we get to the Schumann report, because the magnetogram is really quite nice. So here is 3762. And we just see in general all the different polarities, the mixing of them. This is why this sunspot group has been so nasty, you could say, just producing so much energy. But look here, here's 3768. It's really pumped up recently. It's, out of nowhere too, right? This 24 hours ago basically did not exist. And now we have a sunspot group that in many ways has stronger magnetic polarities than 3762, which has been flaring like a madman. I mean, here we see the magnetic field strength is very strong, right? These deep, dark colors indicate a stronger magnetic field in terms of Gauss. And then here we have our other cluster, which is 6.3, and then all the others. So this is kind of odd. This is an isolated positive core, but then you have this extreme mixing here. And we also have this guy up there too, kind of adding in and creating this larger kind of circle of flux there. So very, very anomalous. I mean, not for solar cycle 25, we've been seeing this. But as it relates to the past 2 weeks of activity, like we saw with the X-ray flux, this is pretty much out of nowhere. And so this definitely is a big energetic shift, a massive energetic shift for just our local solar system reference frame, but also the Earth, because we're at 1 astronomical unit. Venus recently just got hit by coronal mass ejection, so she got energized. And so there's this energy in general just being popped out all across our solar system. And so if you're someone that practices astrology and looks into these archetypal energies, that means that whatever the astrology would be is enhanced because of all of this. Compared to, let's say, any planetary geometries and archetypal energies that existed during solar minimum, you don't have that extra layer of solar enhancement on top. So that makes all these things stronger. That's at least what I believe. That's what we seem to see when you track this stuff over time. I also want to show the electron flux here because we have that solar storm coming in on the 29th, the 30th or so. NOAA says the 30th, right? The ELEVO model says the 29th. This is now going back up. So these are electrons in our radiation belts. They surround the Earth, this inner plasmasphere. And when you have more electrons there and more ions there in general, they can then cause greater energy perturbations deeper on Earth when there's a solar storm impact, because they get crunched and precipitate down into our ionosphere and our atmosphere, triggering very strong telluric currents in the ionosphere and also the ground surface. And so they're just starting to charge up now because they recovered from that minor G1 storm that we had. That's what happens, is you get electron flux typically going up after a storm. But they have about another day to continue going up until we get that impact. And so that is going to trigger greater energy volatility down here on Earth, not just magnetic field strength, but for example, telluric currents for the Earth, but then also enhanced weather activity, because this is all part of the global electric circuit, which is what weather activity is very much connected to because of electromagnetic potentials. So we have this increased electron flux, and we just came out of a geomagnetic storm. It was fairly minor, but still we had it. So here we see all this activity, kind of lean off screen there. We see, all fairly low grade, all green, and now it's going up into the G1 zone. So if you've been feeling it, you're not crazy. I know I've been feeling it, not like, being bedridden or anything, but typically I'm pretty good at being fortified against this, but I have been feeling it recently. So I believe we'll have a micronova soon. I don't think there's any evidence that we will have a micronova anytime soon. And also micronova, here's the thing, micronova is a term that's used for a completely different star category. It's not, they've never observed a micronova from a star that's like our sun. So all that stuff is people making big assumptions and falsities and not being accurate with the scientific data. Now, have you been observing the solar system for that long? No. Or other stars for that long? No. I'm sure there's a lot of things that our sun does that would surprise us. We've seen in the geologic record with like carbon radioisotopes, like really big increases in solar flux. Maybe you can call that a micronova. What's the word even mean? What's our definition of it mean, right? That's all important too. We all have different definitions. But in terms of a very large solar blast, you could say, that's definitely possible. And it's more likely during solar maximum than solar minimum. But can we pinpoint the date and time? Anyone that's telling you that, at least in my opinion, is total hogwash and lying to you and doing it for clicks and views. Unless they're, a prophet or something, right? There's no way to know. We just have to wait and see. That's how it works. That's usually how geology works, right? The volcano is fine until it explodes. So let's go now to our Schumann report and talk about that, because we've had this really big power increase in the Schumann resonances. Now this is, I want to read this here. This is the 0 to 40 hertz vertical electric field showing Schumann resonances as observed by the space observing system at Tomsk, Russia. So what we're looking at is fundamentally our background electric field, the vertical component, which is that electric gradient going from the ground surface up to the ionosphere. And we're looking at frequencies going from 0 to 40 hertz. 0 is right here, 40 hertz is down below. We see our frequency y-axis. Then we see Schumann resonances naturally occupy this range of the electromagnetic field. Here are the Schumann resonances, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? This is 7.8 hertz on average, going all the way to 33 hertz for mode 5. And in between, these are not Schumann resonances. These are just a normal background field that don't have these resonant characteristics with the Earth. So these have a slightly higher energy over background normal radiation because of the fact that their wavelengths are reciprocal and harmonic with the Earth. But we also see other things in this vertical electric field 0 to 40 hertz spectrogram. We don't see just Schumann resonances. We can see things like microphonics or geomagnetic pulsations. Like they're collecting this with a wire that they string out, and when the wind blows, the wire shakes, creating low frequency noise based on the frequency of the wind blowing. And so this is not some sort of power burst. This is microphonics, and it has a clear signature. See these lines that go across in the low frequency component? That's a sign that you have microphonics. I talked to some Schumann resonance antenna engineers and people to learn that, right? So you see that also here. Then we get a big power burst. This is connected to a local weather system that is running through Tomsk right now. At least that's what it seems to be. If we look at our weather data here, I'm going to step off screen. You'll see Tomsk there, this little dot, and then you'll see our most recent data, and you'll see this weather system, precipitation, pass right over perfectly in line with that energy burst. And so local atmospheric weather systems like rain or thunderstorms alter the background electromagnetic field at that location because of the drastically enhanced electromagnetic charge potentials as compared to fair weather conditions when things are like, cloud-free skies. And that's because the ionosphere has a charge potential of 250,000 volts or 300,000 volts in equipotential, but a thunderstorm will have like 50 megavolts. So kilovolt to megavolt, 1,000 times difference, huge difference, and it's much closer to the ground surface. So of course you're going to see a massive increase in the vertical electric field, all the components, the magnetic field, everything locally when you have a thunderstorm passing overhead. Because of the electromagnetic potentials are different, changing that gradient, these vibrations increase in intensity, and boom, there's your power burst, but it's not global in nature. But maybe it is though. I mean, we are seeing some weather activity in Tomsk, but we're also seeing really big increases at the same time in Hungary right now. And the weather activity there is not as clear cut. Here at this station in Sopron, they have a complete geophysical observatory and weather observatory. And they did not record really any rain or any significant weather for this time period. You can look at the data. And so I did correlate it with my weather app on my phone, and it does show some rainstorms kind of passing in between on each side of Sopron. Let's click that again. Right here, and we'll let that go one more time, but it doesn't actually pass over Sopron. So there is nearby weather activity, but not directly over. And these frequencies are very low frequencies, so they will broadcast out a long way. That's why they are these naturally resonant waves across the entire globe. But we just aren't seeing, it seems, a direct thunderstorm passing over Sopron in this geophysical observatory because their actual meteorological station did not pick that up. They have that all there, which makes this data so much better than the space observing system. So perhaps this is some combination of global and local that we're seeing. That's the thing. This data here, it just shows you what it shows you. It doesn't say, oh, here is your local component, you could say. We've teased it out and separated the local factors from the global effect. And so if you have a local effect added on top of some global effect, then it's going to be even more pronounced and a bigger jump. So it's possible. I mean, we can't discount that because here we're seeing very similar increases, right? Now, this is all relative scaling here. I talked to the guy, I actually went to this observatory. This is all relative scaling, so you can't really compare it day by day. This could be 10 times less of a power increase than the day before, but it could look a lot different. The reason why is to do absolute power scaling takes some mathematics and some time, so they'll do that for a research paper. But as it just relates to just looking at it day by day, they just have it set up to just do a relative amplitude. And it's the same for here too. So that's the other thing, is that's one of the biggest roadblocks to actually interpreting this stuff on a day by day, is that the power ratings are always super variable. And so you can't really compare them from one to the other. But we are seeing big increases in the background electromagnetic field, the vertical component across all the frequencies right now in both Sopron, Hungary, and also Tomsk, Russia, which is where most of that X-ray, that X-flare impact, that near X-class flare impact occurred. It occurred right over Europe and Africa. And so this could be connected to all the solar activity that we've been having. And then what the deal is that this energy then radiates out across the globe. There's various ways that solar energy can affect us. There are, for example, the CME impacts and solar storms that we have, which then trigger geomagnetic storms. The magnetic field is fluctuating, and that takes a while for us to start to feel. There's also things like the solar flare itself, the light energy, the photons reaching Earth in 8.3 minutes, and then that can ionize the atmosphere, creating these electric currents, and then creating telluric currents down below and enhanced Schumann resonances. That's a much faster feedback loop because you don't have to wait 3 days, right? You have the solar flare, and then let's say you have a CME that's launched, right? That flare comes in like 8 minutes. The CME will take 3 days. So you're not going to be feeling the CME when it's halfway to Earth. That's just not possible. But you could perhaps have a connection bioelectrically if there's a really strong enhancement of solar flux in terms of light energy. And so the Schumann resonances can respond pretty quickly, theoretically, to something like a solar flare. And there is some data supporting that. There's also data and research showing that there isn't a strong connection. My intuition is telling me that it does, but it kind of depends on some of the factors. Because we don't see it every time. We don't see increases in the Schumann resonances every time we get a strong flare. Sometimes we do, though, and it lines up perfectly. So there's a lot of factors that modulate this. But we're seeing this out of the Space Observing System and also out of Hungary. Are things looking good in the world? Do you have any prophetic visions, insight on the next 2 weeks? On the next 2 weeks, no. I mean, the only thing I comment on is last night I had a dream that World War III started, now that I remember that. That was weird, and I don't want that to occur, nor do I think that's... It was like the U.S. was like made an announcement that it was building up its military in anticipation of World War III, which I found odd. But in terms of big energies for the next 2 weeks, I mean, just in general, we have these solar storms coming in. I would say there's going to be a lot more shenanigans for like the U.S. political thing. It's complete chaos, but that's what they want it to be. I mean, it's all planned out as best as they can. And I would say the wild card is that Jupiter-Saturn square that's active through August and a little bit on each side. That's where things are going to kind of get a little wild. So it relates to our law and our order and our political system and all that. It's getting shaken up, and a lot of tension is going to be there because of that Jupiter-Saturn square. What's up with those big energy waves that start suddenly and not gradually? Yeah, that could be the local atmospheric activity. Have you begun to chart general time deltas between Schumann resonance perturbations and subsequent appearances of dangerous sunspot formation? No. I mean, Schumann resonances would be more a derivative of solar activity, just as the Earth and its energy systems are more a derivative of the sun. Of course, there is this bidirectional connection if we start to think about, the greater kind of unity of things. But in general, it's more of a derivative. So the sun does something and then the Earth responds. And to track the other way is probably a lot more difficult to do and more like subterranean, because it's not an obvious feedback mechanism. It's more in like these quantum fields, you could say. That's a hypothesis. We have some more questions. What are your thoughts on the piezoelectricity effect of crystals and the giant crystals in southern USA? Who knows where else they may be, like in Brazil? This is a circuit, don't you believe? Yeah, so crystals like quartz, for example, piezoelectricity means that when you apply pressure to them, they are able to basically emit electricity. And the reason why is they have this crystal lattice, this structure that has some electrons in it. And they're only liberated when you apply pressure to that crystal structure. It deforms, and then some of these electrons go out. And this is the basis of rock batteries and rock circuits, is that you need sufficient stress and deformation on these mineralogic and crystal structures for these electrons to be liberated and for them to start to flow, creating an electric current, which can then cause an overload and, let's say, like an earthquake. And so solar energy coming in isn't going to cause a piezoelectric effect. You need actual pressure on the crystal to do that. So for example, with seismic, if you're doing like land seismic surveys, like you with your own seismograph, you take a sledgehammer and you put a little piezoelectric trigger switch on it. It's a quartz crystal, and you have to slam that sledgehammer on the ground for that crystal to then generate the signal that tells the seismograph to record data. And so I've done a bunch of that. But you're using a sledgehammer to trigger that piezoelectric effect. It's not a small thing. So you need sufficient pressure to trigger that. And as it relates to large scale, I don't know. I mean, that's interesting. All these large crystal deposits in parts of the US that don't receive much earthquake activity, they're really deep in the Pluton, the continental plate. They don't receive as much stress and deformation. Same with like Brazil. And so that's the interesting idea, though, how electric currents are radiating out from there. Let's go back up. I had the same dream. Okay. Impetus is energy waves from the galactic center. Yeah, but we have no way of measuring that. Like, we can look at some dust, but we're measuring things from a single little point on Earth, and like we only have Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 that are just outside the heliosphere. So these energy waves, who's measuring them? There's really no way to measure those. Galactic rays are like, galactic particles and particle flux like that. This is not light photons. This is the super high vibrational ions from interstellar space and beyond. That's modulated by the solar cycle. So that's also not telling us like the background field. So this whole energy waves from the galactic center, I'm sure they exist, but we don't even have an ability to really observe those yet or even measure them. So anyone that's telling you that that's exactly what it is, again, is misrepresenting the data as best as my research tells me. Because I looked into this a lot, because I was like, that's crazy, that's super cool, that's really interesting. What's that all about? And then it turns out, oh, it's just a whole bunch of people misrepresenting the data for their own kind of like story and agenda. So you have to research into it. Now, and actually right now in our interstellar space, we are in like a void. We're like in a low dust zone. And there's evidence that when we moved recently, we're always moving through the interstellar space and galaxy, that in 2 million years ago or so, we were in a higher concentration zone. And so as a result, the heliosphere is smaller and all this stuff. But right now we're actually in like a low energy zone, because all this dust and nebula and everything, that's a much more high energy place. And so we're actually in a low energy zone right now. We're in like a void as it relates to a lot of these energies. So yeah, it's actually pretty much the opposite of what a lot of people are saying. Do you feel from your knowledge if there's a possibility of massive volcanic eruptions? I mean, let's get over to the earthquake graph. I'm glad you asked that question. here is our global earthquake activity, and this is going from January 1st to July 28th, 2024, and the data for the 28th, of course, is not finished, but in general, what you see is earthquake activity was normal, and then we had this big drop, and I made a video on this back around July 11th or so, and I was thinking maybe it's just because their data systems haven't been updated, right? Like maybe there's a lag time on them receiving this data and plotting it, which could then, you know, correlate to us seeing an anomalous drop. But that's not the case, because here we see, this is magnitude 4 and greater earthquakes. We see that then there was a few days, you know, within the past week, earthquakes did go up and now they're back down again. And so I looked at the data going back to like 2022, 2020, and like going all the way back, right? I went through a whole bunch. I wasn't able to make plots longer than 2 years though, for some reason. This website tool only lets you make 2-year plots. But this is very anomalous. We don't see this drop in earthquakes really at any other time. So we're seeing all this solar energy flux. To bring it back to what this video is about, we're seeing this huge, massive amount of solar energy flux, and we're seeing the Earth respond with less earthquakes and with changes in her geophysical systems, which is odd. And if we go back to solar cycle 24, that's actually when we saw a lot of earthquakes. It seems that when solar pressure is taken off the Earth then pushes more energy out because you don't have energy loading in. It's hard to be releasing energy when energy is being stuffed in, right? And so right now we have a bunch of solar energy flux going in, loading into the global electric circuit and the Earth battery, you could say. And I would think that when we finally get a reprieve from some of that solar energy, and for a longer duration too, that's when we're going to see things pop off. And so right now things are loading and building. These charges are getting bigger and bigger, and if the charges can get really large, that's when we have the potential for larger energy bursts from the Earth itself, right? Just as solar energy flux can go out, so can Earth energy flux. We're having things happen with our inner core. I've done a lot of research into the inner core, just haven't made the video on it yet. And so there are these flux lobes of energy that get pushed out from the core, traveling very slowly through the mantle, and then when they erupt from the Earth, they cause things like the South Atlantic anomaly and these magnetic lows or these highs, these big swings. Just very recently, we've been looking at local intensity variations in the magnetic field, and we see that in the past 2,000 years, there's been big swings in the magnetic field strength up and down across the globe in very select areas. So they can be highly localized, these flux lobes that push out. And so, for example, if you have one of these flux lobes push out over a very large supervolcano or a normal volcano, but if you want to go all the way to the most clear example, a supervolcano, that could be a trigger for that. And now it also requires a certain amount of pressure and magma loading and destabilization of the geologic cap on top of all that energy. But you get something there that changes that all of a sudden, this big energy flux push, that could be what destabilizes enough for it to go boom. And the biggest supervolcano that we have that I would be looking at and concerned about would be Gokul supervolcano, because we have the North Magnetic Field Pole moving right over Gokul supervolcano at this moment in time. I have a video on that. Reason why I'm most concerned about that one, and I'm not saying it's going to like blow or anything in our lifetime, but just of all the supervolcanoes to look at, that is one that's very interesting because it's being loaded with more solar energy right now because of the magnetic pole being directly over it. And that funnels all these solar mass and ions directly into that part of the globe, right? Because it's an inward field at the North Pole. And so you have like Potswali and Campi Flegrei, and you have other supervolcanoes that have been showing signs of activity, but most of the energy loading right now from the sun at least is going to the North Magnetic Pole, which is right where Gokul supervolcano is. So there's some other questions that we had. So the Earth is holding on to all the energy from the sun. Yeah, that's what it seems. And we see that across, when we look at correlative data between solar cycles and earthquakes, we see that when solar cycles are weaker or when there's a solar minimum, that's when we get more earthquakes, because you now have room for this energy to express itself, right? When you have solar energy pushing in, it's harder to then push energy out against that, right? Just like a river's flowing, it's going to be hard to create a counter current that's going upstream, right? You need a very strong motor, and gravity's working against you. But if the situation changes, right, then all of a sudden you could have that. So that's what happens when solar energy gets pulled back. When you're on the descending phase of a solar cycle, and then at solar minimum, that's when a lot of earthquakes pop off. If you look at the larger record, we had a lot of earthquakes pop off around solar cycle 24 because it was the bottom of a Gleisberg cycle. It was anomalously low. So there was a lot of really big magnitude 9 and close to magnitude 9 earthquakes in that solar cycle 24 zone, which is, around 2004 or 5 all the way to like 2019 or so. And it's a really clear clustering. I've shown that in other videos. I would have to grab my SD card to get the data out for you. The theory is that the Earth has a growing plasma core that creates mantle expansion, is consistent with earthquake and volcanic activity produced as core experiences energetic induction. Yeah, so there's a lot. We really don't know what's happening at the core. We know a little bit, but we don't know. We can't make any grand proclamations as it relates to the core. And so that also goes for saying that the core is some plasma engine. That is a possibility. I think it's important to be very careful with our language here. There is geodynamo theory, and we know that the inner core is solid because of how sound waves travel through it. They allow for compressional waves, P waves, and S waves, which are shear waves. Liquids do not allow shear waves to propagate through them. Liquids they don't allow shear waves. But we see shear waves and compressional waves travel through the inner core. And so we know that the inner core is solid. We know that there's this liquid zone around it, or at least, malleable, viscous, more liquid, because shear waves drop almost to zero. It's not like it's, water like this, right? But it doesn't have a capability of holding on to shear waves. So what is the inner core though? We know roughly it's like density and its composition based on applying different densities and pressures and temperatures to elements like iron, and we can get pretty much the same values and ratios, but what's the actual alloy composition? But then there's like, for example, georeactor theory, which is that there is a massive geonuclear reactor at the very center. Like if iron went to the center of the Earth because it's denser than silicone, for example, and oxygen and all the elements and materials of the mantle and the crust, then why wouldn't, for example, plutonium and uranium and thorium sink to the absolute center of the Earth? They have by far the heaviest density. If you ever picked up mercury or lead, well, they're even heavier than that. And so georeactor theory hasn't been given that much attention or research. Came out a while ago, like 20 years ago. But for me, it makes perfect sense because we have evidence also of georeactors naturally being found in the crust. So if we've seen natural georeactor and those chain reactions be self-sustaining to some degree in the crust, then why can't that occur deep in the Earth when you have this natural shielding and pressure and temperature to confine all of it? And so you get these neutrons being produced, creating that chain reaction, keeps it going. But these neutrons will also go and react with other things and create light elements. And so you need these light elements have a density that's much, much, much less than uranium. So they would then immediately want to push out. And so I would imagine that there's like these kind of dendritic networks of light elements coming out from the core, eventually forming this like subshell that's fluid. And they have charges to them as well, and then they're flowing around in this vortex, the spiral, creating a magnetic field. And so there's this theory too. And at what point is this like plasma is like hydrogen ions and stuff? Is it uranium or is it hydrogen that's at the core of the Earth? There's a lot of ways to explain this. We know that the core is fairly dense though. But what's actually happening down there, we don't know. Maybe I'm quite behind. What is the energy attacking? What is this energy attacking since days the sun from 2 o'clock? I don't understand what you're saying. So we have this anomalous drop in earthquake activity. I don't know what that means as it relates to how it's going to respond and when it'll respond in terms of like bumping back up. But I would look at when solar flux is going to go down. Like when we do have a reprieve from all this sunspot activity, if I go all the way back over again, when we have a reprieve from all this solar activity here, that's when I would expect earthquake activity to go up. If there was to be some sort of volcanic activity, that's when I would expect that to go up. But just in general, we're seeing a big increase in flux from the sun and on our Earth already, right now, but also really coming on the 29th to 30th. And now from this most recent CME that was launched from that near X-class flare, going all the way into early August. And we have a new moon on August 4th. So if we have the solar activity continue on, then we could see the moon interacting with the solar wind, causing greater energy perturbations of that as well. Because we've observed that when the moon is in the solar wind and it's coming in, it can cause these nanotesla fluctuations as well that are quite significant. There's a noisy region and then they can propagate out. And so we have a lot happening. This Leo new moon is going to be supercharged. It's connected to a lot of different energies. There's some very interesting planetary geometries occurring. Venus will be square Uranus. She's also in a quincunx, double quincunx to Neptune and Pluto, which is called a yod. They're sextile. It's kind of independent of the moon, but it is happening. The moon is going to be trine Jupiter and Mars. And so, yeah, very strange energy, a lot of energy, and we see that nicely with our chronograph. So that basically covers everything I wanted to talk about in a kind of a loopy way. So if you have any questions, now's the time to ask them. I know I've already been responding to some, so I'll take a few more questions. Type at Stefan Burns, and we'll get that to show up. And we'll do that, and then we'll sign off. And just in general, wishing you all well. I recommend today you go out, you do some grounding, you do some breath work, pump your lungs with oxygen, right? Deep belly breaths from your diaphragm. Circulate that energy. And I think a lot of this energy right now that we're being given is going to the lower chakras. It's going to root, it's going to sacral, it's going to solar plexus. And that's mirroring what I've been experiencing in my life. So N equals 1 at least for my observations there. And so anything you can do to circulate that energy. So A, eat healthy for gut health, that's sacral. B, make sure you're doing some sort of activity. Move your legs, whether that's riding a bike or going for a walk or squatting or something. Move your body and your legs and get that root chakra active. Or if you have a partner, you can hit the sack and have a lot of fun. And then all of that will supercharge your solar plexus and then work its way up from the heart and then going beyond. So you need to create good energy circulation down below to then work with these upper chakras. And the sun is, in addition to representing the solar plexus also represents the heart. And so just in general, the solar energy field is in chaos, it's in flux right now. You may be noticing that your own kind of magnetic field is also kind of reciprocally responding to this and mirroring this to some degree. And this will, subside with time, but this is a good energy reorganization if you are in coherence with it. If you're working with these energies, then there's much less hardship and suffering. And so you need to, for some people, be able to let go, to let it happen, and then it all works out nicely. It doesn't mean that things can't be hard at times, but it's for your best interest, I find, typically, when you're giving this feedback through your body. Yeah, no problem, Wally. And I've had baked potatoes for lunch today and thought of you and grounding. Amazing, Teresa. Yeah, baked potatoes are excellent. They contain all the micronutrients basically that you need. I mean, they're a little low on protein, so add some protein to that meal. Lots of potassium in potatoes, right? They have a really good salt composition. Get organic so you don't get any of the chlorprophan which is a thyroid inhibitor. It's a pesticide and it stops the growth of the little roots from potatoes, chlorpropam. But if you take that, it inhibits your thyroid and alters your hormone system too. So organic potatoes does not have chlorpropam. That's very important. Make sure you do that. And then you also are doing good to the earth because they're, better for the soil management if you buy organic. Biodynamic is best. You can find Demeter certified. That's ideal. If you're in Europe, that's easy. If you're in the States, it's impossible. But if you have a local farm, they're doing good, then go there, get your potatoes. That would mean that we via earth vibrate to the sun that responds to our need to raise consciousness. Communication between the divine masculine sun and divine feminine earth. Yeah, that's my belief system. And I study this scientifically, and then I was studying this scientifically before that kind of formed. Though I've always had like a kind of a druidic earth connection, I would say. And I'm just one person. Everyone has their different beliefs. Someone commented on a video yesterday saying like the moment you said the earth is conscious, you lost all credibility. The earth is just a hunk of rock and there is no God, right? There's no arguing with those people. If you don't even believe in a creator, then and you don't think the earth is conscious, then is that person even conscious, right? Like what makes them so great and so conscious when the earth isn't and then, the sun isn't and then there's no God? Some people are extremely in that zone, you could say, and there's no pulling them out. And so, I do my best to pull people in with the science and things of that nature because there's a lot there and there's a lot of evidence for some of these more esoteric concepts, but not everyone will buy into it, and that's fine because everyone's at different stages of their journey. And so just keep, one step at a time, shogs to shog 'em. Any tips for before and after body imaging on Thursday or Tuesday, Marie? I would just say I would probably go into that body imaging fasted if possible. And I would do grounding right before and I would do grounding right afterwards. Ideally you don't do it at all, but if you have to or, it's your life. But if you do like an hour grounding right before and an hour grounding right afterwards, I think that would be the best thing you could do. And pair that with breath work and really pump your body. Get rid of your inflammation, get your inflammation super low. Because basically any sort of body imaging are really strong magnetic fields which are moving all these charge carriers and things around in your body. And so if you already have inflammation, then you're just adding more chaos on top of that. But if you have a very low inflammatory load and then you add in some chaos, it's not the end of the world. Your body's very intelligent, it's very strong, it can adapt. But it's when you already have things kind of tipped over the edge that you don't want to be exposing yourself to magnetic fields in the Tesla range. This is not smart. So get your inflammation low, do some earthing, deep earthing if you can, that will really help. On the blue screen, the sun is bombarded with pulsating energy. It comes from 2 o'clock. Okay, if you imagine the clock directly opposite, the X flares appear. Do you mean here? This is 2 o'clock. This is, for some reason, I think this is probably the arm that goes for the satellite that blocks the view of the camera. But some of this energy there are protons. See the kind of flickering lights? Those are protons or sometimes little micrometeorites that travel around. And so that's being picked up by the photosensor. This isn't necessarily hitting the sun. There are things that go into the sun, like comets at times. There's tons of stuff that's falling into the sun, I'm sure. But we're just seeing through the photo lens. So something that's right here in front of the lens can look like it's interacting with the sun, millions of miles away. It's a perspective thing. So if there's any last questions, I'll answer them. Otherwise, I hope you're all doing well and just wishing you well. Happy Sunday. I wasn't planning on working today, but I saw the activity last night, so I woke up super early today. Woke up like 5:30 so I could get all this data presented, made for you all. And in general, wishing you all well. We have this solar storm coming in on the 29th or 30th or so. This is the NOAA models. This is for the first cannibal CME. We have more coronal mass ejections headed our way because of all that solar activity. So the next week, I would say, is going to be pretty extreme. And I mean, just look again at these sunspots. They're just growing so rapidly. Yeah, much love to you all as well. And so we have all this flux still to go through Earth Direct. It feels like they've been here forever, but they are still moving through the bullseye zone as we speak right now. And we have these energy bursts happening in our Schumann resonances. Some of it is local, as we see here with weather activity in Tomsk, but some of it perhaps is also global, because we're seeing just odd energy signatures in general for our planet, and this also extends all the way to earthquakes. So just odd things are happening. That's what I'm reporting on. I mean, I've given a lot of kind of my like beliefs and opinions and just best assessment of things based on research and intuitive kind of feeling into it. But there's just a lot that we don't know where it's going to lead. I don't have any clear, this is what's going to happen. I just think that there is an enhanced flux of energy in general manifesting into our quantum field right now, and it's going to manifest across all the different aspects of reality, in terms of your health and wellness, in terms of your relationships, in terms of like community and law and order and society and politics, in terms of geophysical energies. Like, I think they all respond to this at the same time, because the larger impetus is coming from something pushing out of like the implicate order, right? Just like coming out of these fields that we don't even have an ability to measure yet. This is like David Bohm's work. It's very interesting. How do you best suggest this last question, how do you best suggest we navigate random spirit wobbles, like walking drunk without any alcohol, drugs in the body? Feels like a personal earthquake. Well, I've never experienced that. I mean, well, actually I kind of have, I guess you could say. That is often a blood pressure thing, and then also a insulin thing. If your insulin doesn't kick in and you get a really low blood pressure and a sugar crash, then you can get like these kind of like dizzy blackout moments. And so just being more regular with like eating frequency can help. Like fasting is great, but also sometimes fasting is not the answer, and it can lead to things like that. So giving yourself good meals at a more regular frequency can help. It's basically, if you're having that happen to you, like walking drunk, then you clearly have an energy dysregulation. You have some sort of metabolic problem that you need to address. And very honestly, you need to assess what's causing that, because that's not normal. And I mean, yes, there are things like Kundalini awakenings and ascension symptoms, all this. Yes, I'm not taking that away. But it's also based on what we're doing. Like the foundation is our lifestyle, and then everything else builds from there. Like Buddha did not become Buddha by doing nothing, right? It was a journey for him. He took that upon himself. Christ was just born Jesus, but he also went through his own consciousness evolution journey. So it's not like we just sit there and it happens to us. It's what are we doing? What steps and actions are we taking? How is that affecting us in our spiritual evolution and our growth and everything else? And so if you aren't healthy and you're having problems, like actually being able to walk straight, even though you're not on any alcohol or drugs, then you need to seriously look at what that is from. So yeah, wishing you all well. Just some real talk. I am wishing you all well because, I mean, we all have problems and things that we're working on, focusing on, different fate that we've been given. And some people have been given a bigger load sometimes because their spirit signed up for it and they know that they can get through that. I mean, take for example, someone that is 12 years old and all of a sudden they have brain cancer or something. Like, their spirit signed up for that, you could say, because they needed to go through a necessary journey. Or people that live totally normal, healthy lives, all of a sudden they lose both legs in a car crash. And they have to like learn how to walk now with the fake legs and everything. And when you interview those people, they at the end of it, they're always super grateful and it totally transformed. And so, life, it's great to have life when it's going nice and easy, but sometimes we go through these rough patches so then we can learn how to empower ourselves and move forward with it. So yeah, there's sometimes these things kind of bubble up out of nowhere. I noticed that with like my family karma is like gut health on my mom's side, and I noticed at times with my gut health, like there's no real discernible reason why it's kind of not, upset. But then it just forces me to be extra conscious, even more so, and to research more into this stuff, to take that next step. So then I can really even better regulate my system. And so I think that's why that happens at times. And it's just Spirit and God asking you to go to the next level of understanding. That's my interpretation and opinion. So yeah, wishing you all well, sending you all lots of love, grounding. And yeah, just in general, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, click that thumbs up button. And if you'd like to learn more about these background planetary energies that are informing all this, like we have the solar energies, we have the geophysical energies, they're really important, but a lot of this is coming into us from the planetary resonances, which are these deep cycles of time based on the orbital revolutions of the planets. So you have Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, then the inner planets, Mars, Venus, Mercury, we have the Sun, we have Ceres, all the dwarf planets out there. They all influence the archetypal energy field, and effectively what the ancients believed is that, just like I said with fate earlier, things that we are fated to experience, is that there are fated energies that the world at large is meant to experience. And then the sun and the earth manifest those into our reality for us to then work with and deal with. And so if you want to understand what's ahead to a better degree, like really ahead, like next 20 years, next 50 years, 2,000 years, you have to study the planetary resonances. You won't get that by looking at the sun. You'll get that though with the planetary resonances. I have an e-course for you, 15 hours of video content, all on demand, plus also more content in each lesson. And it's really comprehensive. It's only $222. You can use the code Planetary Resonances for 20% off. And a lot of astrological courses from other people, it's like a Zoom call. You have to be there every week. It's not on demand. And it'll cost you like $2,000. And this has the science of astronomy as well, the mythology and the astrology. I did a lot of my own calculations and research as it relates to like the precession of the equinoxes. Calculate the astrological ages, talk about that. Really interesting, probably super undervalued, but I wanted to give this to everyone at an economic price because people were messaging saying, I'm in Africa, how can I afford this? And it's still, it's not $2, but I wanted it to be available to much more people than a $2,000 course. So $222, you can get 20% off till the end of July. That coupon will end for July. It's just a launch coupon for July, 20% off. Hope you find that valuable. Peace and love. God bless. Love and light. And I'll see you all in the next video.